We can't believe we're already at the last panel of the afternoon, but don't worry, there's still more to come. The next session focuses on securing the CPO's place in the C-suite. So let's discover how to achieve that.
Absolutely. Let's discover that indeed. Well, welcome. It's great to have you with us once again for another fantastic session here at the CPO Festival. If you're just joining us, welcome. If you've joined us already earlier today, welcome back. I'm going to go over the same housekeeping announcements just so everyone's aware, so bear with me. If you haven't joined our Slack community, you can go to productledalliance.com, jump off there into our Slack community. It's completely free. And there's about 7,500 other product pros in there. So loads of really, really useful insights. So be sure to do that. Also at productledalliance.com, you'll find loads of useful content. There's membership options, there's courses, there's white papers, there's research. There's so much useful information for people working in the product world. So I really, really do encourage you to check that out. Don't forget, we are meeting in person in London, December 1st. We're going to have our CPO Summit. So do be sure to check that out as well. If you're local, if you're going to be in the area, we look forward to seeing you there. Now, on with the session. So I'm going to ask our speakers to join me on camera. And while they're doing that, as Ruth introduced the session, we're going to be talking about securing the CPO's place in the C-suite and how we can do that. So you may have seen that we did hope to have Jamie Norman with us. Unfortunately, he is not particularly well today, and so he's not going to be able to join the conversation. But I have two excellent speakers joining me, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with them. So we will not be short of things to talk about, I'm sure. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves to discover a little bit more about them before we kick off. So Jane, I'm going to come to you first, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of an intro into you and your background.
Yeah, thank you so much for the intro, James. And I'd love to extend on that. Looking forward to the conversation today with you, Itai and James. So a little bit about me. I typically tell people as I grow older, the company I work for grows younger. Because in the first part of my career, I was back in China and I was working for companies like GE, Intel. That was a very standard large company setting a combination of programming and technology management trainee. And then I came to US, did my second master's at Stanford, and then I was intentionally choosing positions where at least I thought I was running a startup within a large company. So for example, at Sears, I was running Sears online marketplace, which is similar to Amazon's online marketplace for 4.5 years there. And then at Groupon, I was running Goods, which is their e-commerce division as the product leader there. And then for the last almost 3 years, I jumped into a startup world and realized it's still very, very different. So I have been leading the product function in startups. So the first one was Chalbus. That was an Asian food delivery and restaurant technology startup. And then most recently, right now, I'm a chief product officer at Bellhop. So Bellhop is a Series C moving company. So we are aiming to modernize, digitize the moving industry, which is probably the last one of some of the home services. And then I currently lead product engineering, design, and BI.
Great, thank you. Lots of really, really interesting experience there that I'm sure we'll get the benefit of. Itai, do you want to do the same? Do you want to tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, James. Well, originally I'm from Israel. I'm now playing from the German corner. Been living in Berlin for the past 6 years. Before that, I also spent 2 years in Zurich, Switzerland. By education, I'm actually a lawyer, like many Israelis in the startup scene. And I've been doing product management and management in startups for the past almost 20 years now. Actually, I'm exactly the opposite of Jamie, because I think the company I'm working for now is actually the oldest I've ever worked for. That doesn't actually mean it's one of the bigger ones, but it's a very interesting case of a company that has been around for a very long time, but has never actually treated itself as a startup. And the reason I joined it was to turn it into a startup in a way. So it was more like a traditional German business, which is very different from the things I've done in the past. Currently I work for Acclamio in Berlin, and I lead both the entire R&D organization, so engineering, product design, BI, and so on. But I also currently lead the HR team, strangely enough, so the people and culture team. I'm not sure it's by intentional, really intentional, but it is very interesting, and it actually presents some interesting perspectives, both from product and people and culture.
Yeah, it's a really interesting mix. No, thank you very much, Ito. That's great. So to kick things off then, obviously the whole conversation is really going to be about kind of securing the CPO's place in the C-suite. Ultimately, I think that is basically going to come down to how CPOs can demonstrate the value that they bring to the user, to the business, and how they can communicate that. And if they can do that successfully, then that's going to secure their place ultimately, right? So that's the first thing I wanted to touch on. I wanted to get your thoughts on how do CPOs do that? How should they go about trying to demonstrate and communicate that value that they bring to the business? So Itai, maybe we'll start with you if that's okay. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's an additional dimension maybe that we need to address here. It's not only the customer or the user and the business, it's also the organization. And I think part of what product leaders normally do very well is that they bring the C-suite or the leadership suite or their teams, like the team as a whole together. That's part of what I think is very unique about product management, at least the traditional aspects of product management, which is like being sort of a space occupying organ within the company. So your job is to connect things that otherwise may be disjointed. And I think that product leadership, and again, I think we can also talk about what is a CPO and when does one become a CPO? So when does an organization actually need a CPO? Because I think that's also something that's has really evolved over the past, I don't know, I've seen it, I've been CPOing now, I don't know, for 6-7 years, I think. And that has been quite strange, the way the title has kind of shifted its form over the past 5 years, give or take. But I would say definitely our job is to make the organization run better. And that we do that by taking a look at the way the business performs, business processes, data that feeds the business or comes out of the business. Looking at the customer or the user, of course, we as product people, that's the bread and butter, that's the core of everything that we do. But I do tend to believe that we have more than one user in every company, right? We have different types of users. Maybe it's because I no longer only do product management, but I see how people and culture have different, our customers are the employees and DevOps customers are the developers. And to make all of this work together, you have to bring this product view into the entire organization and infuse it into all of the teams. And I think if you do that well, you can really transform the company.
Absolutely. I like that metaphor of the kind of the human body, and it's almost like the connective tissue that's bringing all of the bits together. No, absolutely. I think that's really, really interesting. And Jane, what's your take on that? How do you approach that question?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Itai. I think it's at the organization level, at the people level, at the company level, right? So ultimately, we are bringing that product thinking through the product org, but also throughout the company. And then product thinking is kind of a buzzword, right? But then what does it mean? Because it can mean different things to different people. Like to me, there are a few things into product thinking. One is how can you make decisions using data, right? So be data informed, but also not be tied to you have to wait for the data. And then ultimately, the raw data doesn't really tell the story. It's what kind of right question you want to ask, what kind of insight do you want to extract on data. So that's something that you can do to really add value there. And the second thing is to iterate, right? So how do you define the right scope of an MVP product? And then how do you help the entire organization to see the value from that and then move really fast beyond that, learn from it, right? And then most importantly, I really like that, Itai, you are leading product and people, because I think that's one of the trend, because as the chief product officer, you have to be able to see people, right? So the people here includes the users, internal users and external users and the partners as well. So if you can see people's desires, see their motivation, see their challenges, then of course you will be thinking on their behalf. So that's an integral part of the product thinking as well. So I think that's really the important framework that we want to use. Now, how do you communicate that? I think you definitely want to create the right forums, right? So you may want to have a lot of brainstorming sessions, defining the problem. You may want to have user workshops. You may want to have monthly product business reviews, etc. Right? But also more importantly, you want to really reflect that kind of thinking in your day-to-day decision-making and then bring into the results there.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And I think what I find very interesting is that in the product organization, it's usually already taken for granted that we try to take problems and look at problems. And then we try to do discovery and we try to do different things depending on methodologies, but everybody basically in the end does the same things. They just name them differently. If you're doing what everybody's doing, right? But in the other parts of the organization, normally this way of thinking is not embedded. And that's where I think our job as product leaders is to bring this way of thinking, to tell the business people, don't come up with a solution. Let's bring the problem to the table and let's figure out what is the problem and why do we have this problem? And then we can start thinking and ideating around some possible solutions. We may be able to test them under some circumstances, depending on the problem, depending on the audience, depending on many things. But in the end, the idea is not that you come up with, I have it, I cracked it, that's the solution, and now we go for it. And it's a make or break kind of thing. So no one has a clue if this is going to work or not. Our job is to force them to think in, bring problems to the table, and not only in product, but everywhere. And now let's figure out what is the optimal solution we're able to deliver under, the knowledge that we're able to collect, to aggregate the data, the analysis, the access that we have to different resources, to the customer, right? In many cases, our customer is internal. We have direct access to them. They actually work with us, so we can really talk to them whenever we want. So it's very easy to actually conduct research on them. And the same with our customers. I don't know, like in a B2B setup, when you have some kind of customer portfolio, you have access to these companies, right? You have the weekly calls with them. You have an ongoing relationship. You just need to utilize that. And that is the mindset thing that I think many organizations, not the product part, but the other part, are somewhat left behind. And I think this is something we need to bring to the table. And that is what in the end also helps us drive towards this magical product-led company that everybody really yaps about nowadays.
Right. And when you say defining the problem, it sounds simple, but it's not, right? So actually defining the problem is half the success, and it takes a ton of repetition. I don't think it's ever too much to repeat that, and then it takes a lot of practice to do it right.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. It's a really good point. How do you do that? Like, it sounds so simple, let's define the problem, but like you say, it's a lot more difficult than it sounds. So how would you actually approach doing that?
Well,
Itai, go on.
Well, I think there are different ways to approach this. Like there is the structured methodological way of doing workshops, the same as we do, regarding design thinking, regarding, the double diamond and all of that we tend to do internally for the product organization, is extending that. That's one thing which I think, sharing methodologies and knowledge that was accumulated within our discipline to other parts of the organization is something that I think, relatively easily can do. And that is the structured path. But then there's the other side of that, which I think I call it like it's the instinct, right? Because when I started doing product management, this entire thing did not exist as a methodology. I mean, we did things based on or you can just call it common sense, right? And that is on how you build your relationship with other leaders in the organization and with the rest of the organization. How do they perceive you as a product leader? What is your role? And that's something that it's very hard to kind of pinpoint, and for me to say do 1, 2, 3 and everything will be okay, right? Because it's not a one size fits all. It's not even a one size fits most. It's a one size normally fits, well, 1.5 situations. Basically, it fits perfectly to the current situation, or even then it's never perfectly. And it may be applied with some modifications to similar situations, but that really then depends on what is the composition of the management of the company and how senior and you are compared to the other people. And of course, that also depends on the industry, because different industries have different, there's a different balance between the different organs within the company, naturally. So that forces you to adapt. But I think that's, for me, has always been the key of good product management, is like I said before, is being this space occupying piece of the organization, basically water that fills spaces, and being adaptive and being very pragmatic. It shouldn't be about yourself. It shouldn't be about egos. It should be about finding optimal solutions to problems that arise. And they're not always product problems. They're not always business problems. They're not even, most of the time, they're not even related to either the product or the business. They relate to different peripheral topics around. But I think once you're able to do that and do it in a structured way, people learn from that, and then they adapt to this way of thinking. And then the entire organization is like a train on tracks, and then you can really go.
Yeah,
but it's hard.
I can add an interesting example to the problem and solution space and how we conquer some of the challenges. This is pretty early in my last company. So I joined there, and then at that time we didn't have a product organization. Basically, it's me and another PM that I hired, right? So, and then the way that used to happen is the CEO or the co-founder, they had an idea. And then, of course, they wouldn't define the problem. They were just, I have an idea. Hey, let's just go for it, right? So one day, the CEO came to me, and then he was really excited. He's like, Jane, I just discovered something. It's a great idea that you can take forward. So he's like, I said, what did you discover? And he's like, I was going through Uber Eats and also DoorDash, looking at their checkout, right? So then I found there's something in common. They have two-step checkout. So you go to checkout, and if you're familiar with food delivery, you see that like one step is all the charges that you have to pay for the company. And then next step is the tips, right? So, and then you confirm that's how you purchase. So he's like, clearly these large companies do a lot of A/B testing, right? So then clearly this is going to give them better conversion. Look at our checkout, is one step. So looks like we need to go to 2 steps. And then I was like, hey, slow down. Like what is the actual problem with our checkout? Let's discuss that, right? So we talk a lot, and what I recognize is, and I think that's valid, is he felt like our checkout page looks overwhelming in terms of all the line level of charges, and it was not a great design, frankly. So there's room to improve. But I also said, look, the typical pattern that we know from working e-commerce for the last 15 years is each step you add to checkout, then likely you're going to see a drop. Right. So I don't want to say that's always the pattern. But I want to point out that there could be other reasons that the big players are doing this way. Could be legal, could be PR, could be they just really want the separation in front of consumers or in front of their drivers. Right. So it's not necessary that it's a better conversion. And also our audience is different. At that time, we had 70% of our audience was in their 20s. 90% were also recent immigrants. So then they are very price sensitive. They probably want to see the total together. So then I said, let's do it. Like I respect your opinion. So let's actually do some user research. So we did 2 design prototypes. One is an improved one step, but looking less overwhelming in terms of the total charges. And then the other is 2-step. And we did that evaluative research with 6 representative users. And then 5 of them came back saying that they didn't even understand that 2-step. They want to see the total. And one of them did prefer the 2-step, right? So with that data, then we came back saying that let's actually do an A/B test with the new prototype with the 1-step, but looking better, and the existing. So the end result was we did see a marginal improvement in terms of conversion, but we see a material improvement in terms of actually tip giving to the drivers. But because of the user testing says this way, we didn't even do the A/B testing with the 2-step because I think that speaks for itself. But I'm glad that we went through the conversation, understood what the concern, the problem statement was, and then did the research and used the data to make the right decision.
I think that's a really great example, both very concrete and tangible, but also it's just a really good example of both the need for a CPO, as someone thinking like that, need for a product org, and also to consider that problem aspect, as you were saying, Itai, rather than starting with a solution that's find the problem first. So no, that's really interesting. Thank you. I want to just draw attention to we had a question already, and I should say, if you're watching and you'd like to ask your questions, we're really keen to hear them, so just drop them in the chat. We'll try and weave them into the conversation if they're kind of relevant. Otherwise, we'll tackle as many as we can at the end and get through them that way. So drop your questions into that chat and we will we'll tackle those. But Cindy said, my current organization has product under engineering. How do we convey the importance, need and value of having a CPO independent from the CTO rather than having it in one combined role? And I think that's a really interesting question about kind of almost a justification of that specific role. So I don't know who wants to jump in first on that one.
I can jump in, but it's really interesting that, because it sounds like both of us, we currently actually are in the combined role. We're leading that combined organization. So I don't want to say there's a one size fit all. And there I've been operating in many different situations. Some were like running in parallel, some were running combined. It probably comes down to the individual leading the organization, right? So I think in my current situation, if I was joining really fresh, and then suddenly leading to organization, it probably would have not worked out well. But if you was already there, that's my case. I was already there. I already established that trust, that confidence across teams, then it could work out well, because typically you do want to have some healthy tension between product and engineering, right? So I want to emphasize on healthy, but I also want to emphasize on tension, that if you're in a situation that engineers don't ask questions of the product requirement, or the product doesn't ask questions regarding the solution, or they don't work together, that's not good either. So both could work. I don't want to say like one is better than the other. It really depends on the focus of the organization. It also depends on the stage, the funding. Again, it mostly depends on the individual. But I want to emphasize that the last thing I want is to artificially have this title, but actually don't have a seat at the table, right? So I would rather not have a CPO role than have a CPO role, but that CPO is actually reporting to a COO or a CTO, and then also in terms of decision making is down that way. So I really don't want that.
I think one of the things that you said resonated with me very strongly. I think for me, it really depends first on the type of product that you have. Because for me, I've been doing web-based products. I call it low tech, right? I think we use tech relatively as a commodity. So where we optimize, we're not breaking, we're not defining the human genome, and we're not breaking any molecules. We're not doing any medical devices. And I think in an organization where the product is extremely limited by technology, by the ability of technology to be realized, I would think product should report to engineering, or could report to engineering, maybe not should. However, in most of the industries where we mostly work, so where technology is mostly about realizing things that are, I would say they're not technologically extremely innovative. It's mostly utilizing existing technologies, maybe adapting them, maybe combining them in relatively somewhat innovative ways, but it's mostly about getting it done correctly and well and quick and cheap based on experience. I think that product should actually be leading engineering, as I'm doing right now to an extent, despite not being a very technical person by education or by nature. I don't write code. But that's really a perspective that, again, I agree, really also depends on the stage, the size of the company. I think the bigger the company is, the less likely it becomes to do both. And I think the more complex the organization becomes, you need dedicated high-level management with experience to set up the organization and to make it work. And I think in the end, if the company is not huge and it's not limited by technology, I think the reasons to have product independent of engineering are very similar to my answer to the previous question. Because I think engineering, by definition, in most cases, have very structured approaches and methodologies to solving problems. And that's very different than the ones that we bring to the table. Now, putting one under the other will not normally yield the optimal result. Putting them next to each other and allowing them to battle it out, so to say, would probably provoke better outcomes.
Absolutely. I can see, yeah, we've got another bit in the chat there. So from Tonya, who says, I've been in both scenarios. I think having a clear divide between the two, especially on a management level, breeds healthier discussions on solutions. So it sounds to me like it's really context dependent. Like there's no one right way. There's no one wrong way. It depends on the circumstance. And Cindy, I think the advice there is maybe, it depends on your individual circumstances to how you do that. But hopefully this whole conversation will be useful in kind of communicating that value of the product element, and you can use that however is relevant in your situation. One thing that's coming through a lot here is kind of working cross-functionally. So whether that's with engineering, whether that's with executive leadership, whether that's with user testing, whether that's with lots of different customer success, it may be lots and lots of different places. But when doing that, when working with non-product areas of the business, how can the product function, how can the CPO be seen as an ally, someone who's there to help and an ally in their success, rather than someone who's coming in and interfering with the core tasks of the other functions? Have you seen that play out, and how can we have a positive relationship with other functions?
Yeah, I can start on that. I think, again, I love that Itai has, for example, demonstrated that he is able to really lead cross-functionally. And I see that more and more from the product leaders as well. And then I would always bring it back to in order to be a product leader, you have to be a company leader. And then what really is a definition for me in terms of if this person is more of a VP of product versus a chief product officer is exactly that. Like, are you also a company leader? Are you also an organization overall leader? Or are you just focusing on really product, right? So then in order to do that, when you're working with other leaders, you want to always bring value to the conversation, to the decision making. You don't want to just be in the conversation for the sake of just representation, right? So you want to actually bring value into it. And then the other thing is to bring genuine curiosity into the conversation, because that genuine curiosity really trying to understand what each other is experiencing, what kind of challenges they have, is going to ultimately help you to deliver value, right? So, and then also really important is to set example for your organization, because the culture and how you interact with different orgs is defined by the leader. Typically, you set example, the others will follow, right? So one, of course, in your day-to-day, you want to represent that you are thinking for the entire company. You are not in this like you versus me kind of mindset, right? And then the other thing is language, words matter. And then you want to, how you educate your team matters. For example, one of the things I would tell my team, and I would always be very mindful myself, is I never refer to the rest of the company as the business, right? So again, potentially it's semantic, but think about like, one, you are part of business as well. And then two, that whenever you are saying, oh, the rest of the company is the business, then you're not humanizing them. You're talking about this is business versus us, technology or whatever, right? So you want to, one, you don't want to really drop names in order to make your argument. But in the case that you really want to talk about, here's what someone else thinks, then use your name, use their name, right? So actually talk about that and then humanize them and ensure that you are working, you're understanding each other's challenges and needs.
I really like that. I think that's very, very important, because it in the end, it tends to be like camps, right? We have the technical camp, like product R&D, the R&D organization, as I call it, and on the other side, you have the business, exactly. And then these two teams start throwing the ball over the fence, and then it really doesn't work. and the real challenge, I think, And maybe it's important to say, because I also, as I said before, I think the CPO role is not that clearly defined yet. And that's why I think in many cases, CPOs still lead product managers directly, for example, which is something that for me, like it may resemble like a CTO in a smaller organization where the CTO still actually codes or he still works on architecture hands-on. However, when I think about CTOs in bigger companies, that's not what they do. And I think that's something that still has to be defined. When do you really need a CPO? When does it make sense to have this title? And what is the difference between a VP of product or a head of product or a senior VP or a director of whatever it is and a CPO? And I think in my current position, I can clearly say that I see the difference, because exactly as Jim said, I think about the company. I want the company to succeed. It's not about making the product work. It's making this entire thing successful. And I'm measuring my success based on the performance of the entire company. And that has many different KPIs. Some of them are in product, but others are in engineering, and some of them are in keeping employees for a longer period of time with us before they move on with their careers, and others are in how much money do we actually manage to make. So, and it's also conveying this way of thinking to the other managers, both in the R&D organization, which I'm responsible for, and people and culture, but also to the entire C-suite. So when you are not narrowly thinking about your domain, I think that is what buys your space. And that is what I think makes you kind of C-level in reality, compared to just having the title and actually being a head of product, that then you do the product based on whatever requirements you get from either the CEO, the founder, depending again on size and stage of the company. And that also conveys that I think a CPO deals, at least in organizations that are a bit bigger, mostly with strategy. So I have to be honest, like hands-on today, I'm not as close to the product as I was 10 years ago. I'm not into every detail. I don't go into most of the low-level technical discussions. I take part in defining the architecture, both technical and product and business architecture. But the things that happen underneath that are with my VPs and heads of. And because they're excellent professionals, I work with them and I trust them. And my job is to think about the entire ship and not only about one department within this ship.
Itai, I'm going to ask you to expand a little bit, just because I've seen another question there from Tonya, and she says, could you talk a little bit about how you place different lead product titles against each other in a hierarchy? So CPO, head of product, director of product, VP of product. How would you, I suppose the question could be, how should they relate to each other maybe?
Well, based on my experience, I think normally in startups, you start as a product manager, senior product manager, then normally next step would be head of product. So head of product would lead a group of product managers. Normally that's the leading product person in an early stage startup. I would say running a team of 1 or up to 3 product managers, normally a designer or 2, UX researcher, whatever you have around in the periphery of that. So roughly a team of 5, 6, 7, 8 people. That's the head of product. Next step would be a VP of product, which for me has to manage at least 2 heads of product, each of them with this type of team. And around that in the periphery already, you need to have quite an engineering organization supporting this entire thing, right? Because every product manager in the end for me has to work with a team, squad, cross-functional, whatever you name it, depending on how you choose to structure the way you work internally. But that already conveys that you have quite an engineering organization with at least, I would say, 30, 40 engineers in it, and then QA, and then DevOps, and the entire thing around it. And then between VP, sometimes between head of and VP, you have the director level, but that's mostly in corporates. So I think if you see director of product in that was laid off from, I don't know, one of the recent layoffs of the bigger companies, these are quite senior people. So they lead leaders, they don't lead directly product managers normally. And if they would go out to a startup, they would probably be on a VP level or a very senior head of. So that would be the level. And then the VP level, as I said, is either leading the directors or the heads of. And in the end, the C level always leads basically the entire organization. So in my case, right now, I have a VP of engineering and a head of product and a lead designer. And in the people and culture side, I have other like 3 or 4 other functions. So all in all, direct reports as a CPO, I still have only 5 or 6 people, but the organization now is like, I don't know, depending on the day, but between 60, 70, 80 people, give or take.
No, that's really helpful. I thought it'd be useful to direct that to you, given your kind of people hat as well that you sometimes wear. So thank you for that. We've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to do a bit of a deeper dive. So obviously at the moment, the kind of CPO title is quite on trend. It's quite a fashionable executive title to everybody wants to have a CPO, right? So how do we, see that as the beginning of something long term, rather than it being a flash in a pan, that it's trendy now, but it's going to be a short-lived appointment and it's not necessarily going to stand the test of time? What can, we as a community do to support product leadership in a way that's long-term and it isn't going to just evaporate as quickly as it became fashionable? It could become unfashionable. So Jane, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, well, first, just to tap onto what Itai just said, it's really interesting that both of us joined the conversation of securing the CPO's place, but neither of us are arguing that it's universally in any situation you have to have a CPO title, right? So, for example, early stage startup, if first year you're creating this title, there's a problem because the founder, co-founder, they must have that product in their mind, like they have to be playing that role in the early stage. If they don't even know that, like, why are you starting this company, right? So that's just interesting to think about. But overall, I think the in order to make sure that this is really a trend that's going to continue, the community really matters. So one, of course, what you're doing right now is awesome, right? So you are inviting us, telling the stories, connecting with each other, connecting with the community. That's great. And then also going back to really in our own day-to-day life, really continuing to show the value, demonstrating the value. That's the most important thing as well. And then, but also really important is to grow the talent. So because you want to be building the next generation of CPOs, right? So you can never really pay it backward. You can always just pay it forward. So what comes with experience is really the eye to very quickly see talent, see some of the young individuals, not only just as who they are right now, but also see their potential, see how high their ceiling could be, and also how fast they could be really growing, right? So, and then really help them to motivate them to grow into that direction of their desire, because ultimately there isn't really an education that's specific for product. You could have that product mindset, product potential when you're in operations organization, when you're in marketing organization, when you're in sales organization, anything, right? So for us to discover that talent with potential and then to help them, that's something that's motivating me a lot as well. And I think that will help us to take this not only title, but also the influence forward.
If I may add to that, I think I would try to break it into two, right? There's the professional side of product management and product leadership per se. I think the younger generation I see coming up, they're much better at it than we've ever been in the past. Like, this profession has really evolved and it's becoming more and more structured. And there are methodologies within this, like, it's not the days where Scrum was the thing that we did, but no one thought about discovery. No one thought about the different methodologies came together, and there's a lot of knowledge out there that you can acquire. And I think that is amazing already. That's a great starting point. However, I think what really differentiates great product people and later great product leaders from just product managers is this ability to work with the entire organization, to interpret and to speak different languages. It's always being customer minded, but not only your product customer, but also the engineer, also the designer, also whoever it is that you're working with right now. Your CEO is your customer in a way. And you have to learn how to speak the languages that get you what you want from all of these people, and get them to see what you're thinking about and how and why you're thinking about that, using your actual product education and the methodologies. And by that, as I said, turning the product into the main thing in the company and becoming product led without even naming that. I think naming company to be product led, I don't like that. I think that already puts people under pressure, and it gives them like, why is product leading us? That doesn't make it. No, they don't need to. No one should say that. That's just something that should happen in the background without anyone even noticing that. And I think that's the part where I think the people who have been around longer and have had more experience in leading and interacting with other leaders in different setups should try to pay back to the community by helping as much as we can. Again, it's very hard to build a course that would say how to deal with a pushy CEO, because every pushy CEO is a bit different, and the way to their heart and their mind is different, and that depends on the relationship that you form with them and the specific circumstances. So I can't give you an answer. However, if you reach out to me later, we can have a conversation. We can try to identify which possible levers would work for this archetype of relationship, situation, company stage, and so on. I think maybe there could be more professional writing about this. Not that I have any intentions. I would suck at that. But I think that's something that's still missing about how to form these relationships and how to interact with different parts of the company from the product driver's seat, basically.
Yeah, and that really resonates with me when you said the labeling of product led, right? So because I come across a lot of candidates, they want to apply for a product director or product manager position, and they ask me straightforward, like, is this organization product led?
Product led.
So in my mind, I was like, are you referring to really product thinking led? Or more than often, they are referring to product manager led. They make the cost. That's not the intent. Right. So you tell me how to influence that product thinking, because you need to bring value to every decision making, every conversation, in order to be effectively product led without saying, I'm here to lead you guys.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And yeah, for sure, we do a lot of work on product led, and we see it as much as a responsibility for people who are outside, who aren't PMs. It's got to be company wide. It's got to involve everybody. If you're going to go down that route, the whole philosophy of being product led is that it isn't all just product is contained within one organization. So you can't then be PM led, as you say, Jane, quite rightly.
Exactly. It's the framework. It's the methodology. It's not this person has to call the shots.
Yeah, absolutely. Building on that, and I'm going to use the term product led, but for context, we mean it in that way rather than PM led. So what can CPOs do to support an organization who wants to become more product led in that way? So you're seen as the lead of the product org, but the organization as a whole wants to be more product led as a go-to-market strategy. How can a CPO support the whole business to achieve that goal?
Start or...
Yeah,
sure. Itai, go.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
Yeah. I think what we discussed earlier regarding how do you add value when you're working cross-functionally really helps, right? But also the other thing I want to mention is really one of the challenges we often face if you're creating that role, or if you are creating or expanding that product organization is there are two ways, right? So one way is the organization used to not have a product org. It's a small organization, and then it used to be just engineers really working on ideas people throw around, right? So, and then the other way is it's a larger organization, but it was more of a project driven, and now you are trying to introduce product thinking into it. So, but in both ways, the challenge and what could get you to fail in really inserting that thinking into the entire organization is to be seen as a blocker, as someone who is slowing things down, right? Because effectively you seem to be doing that, when people are coming up with ideas and you're like, let's slow down, let's take a step back, let's define the problem, right? So that's something that I want people to be aware of, but also two things to help to solve that and then to influence the organization is, one, don't don't underestimate execution, right? So especially if you're executive level, you are expected to jump in and start delivering results almost right away, right? So you want to make sure that you are not slowing down, but rather you are having these quick wins under your belt, because technically if you have that great judgment in decision making, and you have the intuition, you have the analytical skills, then you can make fast decisions, you can deliver something and then demonstrate that to people. And then two is to continuously influence the thinking of, okay, if you slow down at the beginning, you will actually go faster later on, because you define the right direction, you define the right problem, you define the right path as well. So you need to continue to educate that. But I think we want to be very aware of what the perception could be for you to jump in and start thinking, saying that, hey, we need to apply that thinking.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And I think maybe one additional element I like to try to think about is that the product organization has to have tentacles everywhere. And that means that we should be in calls with the salespeople. We should be in cold calls with the SDRs. We should answer the phone with customer support. We need to be in the trenches, really, all of the trenches, to fully understand the problems that we're facing as an organization, not as a product organization, but as an organization. And like I said, we have different customers. So the customer service representative is also a customer of the product, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, but they also have problems. And if we're not there with them to witness the problems and to show them how we address or approach the problems, they will never buy into this. They will just say, hey, you are really annoying, like you're in the way. However, if you go in there with them and you respect what they do, and you should respect what they do because it's bloody hard, and you try to show them that you want to help them, and you also make it very transparent why in some cases you are not going to be able to help them now, but maybe only in 2025. I don't know, that's kind of the magnitude I sometimes have to tell people things. They will still trust you. And I think that in the end, it all boils down to that, right? If you build this relationship and you build this respect towards everybody, and you are present and you understand them, and you go through the effort of communicating with them and understanding them, they will be way more receptive to accept your way of thinking and addressing problems, and they may adapt to it much better. And that's always what I try to do when I come to a new organization. I first try to have like a bird's eye view of what are we doing, what's working, what's not working, really high level, and then really start going into each and every one of these trenches and sit there. Not long, but sit and talk to everybody around me. Collect, absorb. And then I think in most cases, with companies that are not really early stage, things really pop out so strongly that you can't ignore them. And then if you bring this back to the management team, C-level, whoever they are, and you tell them, okay, that's what I see. These are the major problems we as an organization right now are facing. Let's try now to prioritize this together. And that's one of the best exercises I ever did. I took the managing directors of, we had like 20 companies, 20 offices around the world with daughter companies, and they all had managing directors who wanted completely different things because the cultural behavior towards the product in these countries was completely different. And they would come to Berlin, to our headquarters, and would sit in a room and would just ask ridiculous things of me. And when I forced them to start putting things in writing on the wall in front of everybody and justifying what sort of problem is it, what is your solution going to do, and start thinking about the bigger scope, I think that worked magic. like the number of noise or tickets or product requests, whatever, however you're working, but the overall level of noise we got from the outside was reduced by 70% because of this afternoon. We still had to discuss why are we going to do A and not B or C or whatever, but the moment everybody saw how you take a pick chart and you put things on, you know, how much this is going to cost, how much this is going to reel in you know, problem solving value, it was so much easier to align all of them and to realize, you know, that maybe the problem I currently have in Pakistan is not my A priority because it's my 15th largest market and it's a very unique problem. So they stopped complaining. Not because it's not important. It may be very important, but right now as an organization, we have to think bigger.
Yeah, I love that because I think most people, you got to trust most people are reasonable and most people have great intentions. So when you put these people together, a lot of them just want to be heard. It's not necessarily, yes, you sit down and you go through all of that. It may not be every single idea of each person gets voted and become the highest priority, but they feel like they have been heard. That's really important.
Yeah, the power of just being listened to, and you know, even if it's not the answer they necessarily want, it's you know, we can't solve this right now, or you know, this isn't going to be a top priority. Just being heard, I think, it will make a massive difference. That's great. And one thing that I wanted to touch on as well was we're obviously talking about how to secure the CPO's place in the C-suite, and I suppose on a wider level rather than just specific organization, you know, that's going to see a lot of new CPO roles being created in the coming years, and so that's going to mean a lot of new CPOs who have maybe not necessarily done the role before, who are, you know, stepping up, and maybe they're going to stay in that same organization and advocate for a CPO role to be created in that organization. So if someone was in that position that, you know, they felt that their organization was right, the time was right for their organization to have a CPO, and we've already said it's not always right necessarily to have a CPO, but they'd been there and thought we should be having a CPO at this point, I'm going to advocate for that role to be created. What advice would you give them if they're in that situation looking to advocate for the creation of that CPO role?
Yeah, what I think we already talked a lot about the different conditions. Itai gave a really good roadmap there as well. For me, I think a practical advice I can give is a lot of the organization leaders have that mindset. They open up the role with some flexibility. So rather than push to say it has to be CPO, I would advise to say, hey, how about let's consider, like right now we're probably in between, right? So maybe we create this role which could be VP. And if we have all the candidates coming through that are strong, they're great for VP, but they're not CPO, then in that case, I would, rather than inflating the title and then have someone who is a VP level on CPO role, I would be, okay, let's just open it as a VP. Let's actually extend the offer as a VP, right? So, but if we see great candidates coming through that are clearly at the C-suite level, then this will be a CPO. I think once you have that person actually show up at the doorstep, it becomes much easier for the CEO or for the board to make that decision. Before you see the profile, before you see even the people, it's going to be really hard for them to put the foot down that has to be a CPO.
I fully agree, and I can bring myself as an example. I was a CPO, and then when switching jobs, I was offered a VP position for the past two jobs. So I've been the CPO for like 5 years, and I was offered this a VP or an SVP. But to be honest, I don't care about the title. What was most important for me was what sort of, you know, what sort of responsibility will I have, and what am I going to be doing? And that is the definition that is important. I think titles normally should follow that. And when you know, falling directly into a CPO role from the outside, even having the experience I've had, even my current position, they wanted me to join as a VP. I said, fine, I don't care. As long as I know that I'm leading the team that I'll be leading, and I have, you know, the responsibility for that. And basically later they said, okay, yeah, you should be the CPO, because they've never had a CPO and they were afraid of what that would mean if they bring someone from the outside. Would I perform? Would I fit in? And I really think that is a much healthier way to establish this position is from coming and climbing up, not even intentionally, because in the end, I really don't mind what's written in the job title. It's really about what do I get to do and what sort of influence do I have within the organization. In some organizations, that's really fundamental to have the title. Otherwise, you cannot have influence in certain areas. But mostly in startups, that's not the case. So if you have the experience, if you come with enough baggage, you will be heard and you will have the ability to make an impact. And then, one way or another, you are the CPO, even if that's not the title.
I think that's really interesting. 100%. Sorry, Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying 100%. I think it's even this whole conversation, or as we refer to the CPO, it's really the title is secondary. I think the first and foremost is, like Itai mentioned, is do you have that seat at the table, right? Do you have that scope and structure to ensure that you are at the table?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I experienced from the outside for sure. Like we call this the CPO festival. That's just the name. People say to me, oh, I'll be talking to people and say, oh, it'd be great to have you come and join us. And they say, oh, but I'm not a CPO. And I say, right, okay, you might not have the title. You might not be titled CPO, but you're kind of de facto CPO. And you've got that role, even if you're not currently referred to by that title. And I think that's a really important takeaway for people. You can perform the role of that person without necessarily having the title CPO. So when we say CPO festival, we don't mean you can only come if you've got these 3 words in your title. So yeah, I think that's a really good thing for people to take away from this conversation. I'm very aware we've only got a couple of minutes left. Time has gone so quickly on this session. So I just want to do one last one, and maybe 45 seconds, a minute each on this one. But just looking to the future, what do you think the future of the CPO role, not necessarily title, the future of the CPO role is going to be? Will we still have them in 10 years? And assuming that the answer to that is yes, how do you think they might differ from today?
I think the answer is yes, because now more and more the company realize that they are not just selling a product or a service, they are selling on an entire experience, right? So that justifies it further. And then the other thing is, I think there is a recalibration of engineering talent recently, so that the companies realize they don't have unlimited engineers and they can't pay unlimited for the engineers. So it's even more so the prioritization practically is more and more important for their resources. So both of these very practically would continue to justify the influence here. And then in terms of the future, I don't have a magic mirror to see exactly, but I can see the lines continue to blur. Like I always was thinking about, hey, product and people that come together. So I'm glad to get some validation today from Itai. But overall, if you think about it, I think it's the continued blur to say, here's the digital experience, which is the current default scope for the product, but also what about the human interactions? What about the physical interactions? Can the chief product officer or the product organization contribute more to that? So I think that's another trend that we should be watching for.
Yeah, just maybe 2 words. I think as technology becomes more and more of a commodity, and as we will have AI writing code for us in the future, and whatever it is, I think it will boil down to this human aspect of product, or the product methodologies and ways of thinking, and brings into the organization. And therefore, I actually think as the barrier for technology becomes lower, I think product becomes even more central with the way it oversees everything. And as I said, a holistic product view oversees the entire organization, and not only the product that we're actually, or the service that we're providing or selling or whatever, or how we make money. And I think that would actually speak, and I think that's interesting that we are both, again, as we said, we're also leading engineers, in my case, without even being an engineer, to a certain extent. So I see the future going in this direction, except for those who are still really developing technology. And these are strange people that I don't know.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both very much for taking the time to share your thoughts with me and the audience today. I think it's been really, really interesting, and I'm sure lots of useful nuggets that the audience will be able to take away and back into their own roles as well. So thank you both. I really, really appreciate it. And thanks to our audience as well for getting those questions in and lots of comments in the chat there. And hope you found it useful. We have got one session left. So I will see you in there. When you close this down, it'll pop you back to the agenda and you can load up the next one. We'll have a little break for about 15 minutes and then it'll start. So you can join it about now and we'll see you kicking off in about 15 minutes in the next session. But thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.